Hello, this is Max Drake. I want to talk about the WITS thing here, so the Wholesale Information Trading System. So this is, because it's trading, it's sort of dynamic and changing over time. So historically, what I'd actually done before is I'd got this Python future prices with the WITS API. So what happens is I fired off some API queries, the data came back in JSON format, I brought it into pandas, manipulated that data, ended up creating a CSV with some data, but I also created a MatPloLib plot and saved that to a PDF, and then I emailed that to myself. But that was done on a task scheduler, so therefore it would only happen whenever that task was actually scheduled. So what happened, because this is dynamic data, I wanted to kind of have updates throughout the day. It was set at actually triggering at 6 o'clock in the morning, and that's when the email was sent. But I suddenly thought, no, I need it for something more than that. So the next thing I looked at was actually doing a remote trigger. So anyway, I looked at all these different ways of doing it, and in the end I found I could have a button on a web page, and if I hit that button it would trigger the server to actually go and run those scripts, and then it would send me the email at those times. So I could get that update throughout the day. So as the trading was occurring, so you could do that sort of thing. Then suddenly thought, well, if I can have a button on a web page, why can't I actually have dynamic information on the web page? So that seemed to be an obvious follow-on. So I had another little project which I was thinking of at the time, and I was also semi-interested in from the point of view of the transit data on a map. I quite like maps, so it's quite nice to do that. So I made a little project which was actually thinking about, if I was waiting at a bus stop, could I find out where the information was come from? Now they've started, I looked at the transit data, and there was an open API for MatLink for Wellington, so I thought, oh, I wonder, I'll play with that. And the other one is I actually had an API key for Google Maps, so I thought, well, okay, then I've got Google Maps there, and I've got some information, so I can actually plot the route, I can plot the bus stops, and then I can actually make an API call. I can actually have a little button through here, and if I press on that button, it'll give me the time of when the next bus is going from my particular bus stop down to the city, which is what I wanted. And then also, if it was earlier or later, so as the bus has actually got an ID and it's running, they can actually see whether it's ahead of time or on time as it actually passes each bus stop, because they've got a specific time set for each of those. So like if it's in the middle of if it's early in the morning, or sorry, in the rush hour type thing, it may be slower because lots of people are getting on each stop. Whereas if it's in the middle of the day, nobody's using it, so the bus can actually blast through, so it most probably running early. So you can see whether you can come out early. Also, at the same point in time, every 5 seconds it would do an API call, and this little blue dot here would be the bus moving along the actual tracking along the actual destination of the route. So you could see how close or how far it was away from you. So if you're standing out there, you could see where the bus was actually, so you could look out for the actual bus itself. So if you knew that, if it gets past a certain bus stop, I've got enough time to walk out and do that. So once you see it doing that trigger, off it would go. So suddenly I could do live data. So I suddenly think, well, can I take that and transform it into something for these ones instead? So, and this is the result through here. Well, sorry, this is the result that I've got through here. So this is a page that I've got that's showing it. So this has got a few features in it, and I'm just really going to step through the beginning things through here. Initially, I was going to do this with Plotly Dash, but what actually happened was I decided to do a tutorial on Dash, and it had a little bit of a code, and it was about 30 lines that you actually had to do. And it said, you should create a local environment. So I was loading up all of these libraries and Python 10 and everything all onto this local, and I had a slow Wi-Fi, and it was just taking ages. And in the end, I just got frustrated with it. It took over an hour to load all these libraries and try and actually get them all sorted. And I found I'd got 100 megabytes of data. And I thought, to run 30 lines of code, I'm sorry, that sort of peed me off. So I bring it out, and I started to say, well, what's my alternative to to Dash? And I saw this article here on Plotly Dash versus Streamlit, And this one here says, well, you know, Dash has been around since 2017 or 2016, and Streamlit's only been around since about 2019. Look what the popularity of that. And I looked at a couple of videos on Streamlit, and I started thinking, yeah, quite cool. And in fact, I found another article on dynamic visualizations in the browsers, and it has a whole lot of things through here. Now, a couple of things. Dash is associated. Plotly actually created Dash, so Plotly is the main plot library that you actually have with Dash, but it does support other libraries. Streamlit's agnostic. That means you can try any visualizing library that you actually want. So that's quite one of ones that you can actually try. So I thought, well, that's quite good. And I'd done a tutorial on Streamlit for share prices, and it was an Indian gentleman who was doing it. It was he had this tutorial and just went through. And I said, I wonder if I could do that. So it took me a while to figure out the New Zealand share IDs that I needed, but it ended up working perfectly. You know, his tutorial just went through beautifully. So I thought, well, I've done Streamlit before, so I'll actually stick with Streamlit at this point in time. So that's what I decided to do. So I built the thing, and this one here is built inside Streamlit, and I've got it running on my server, but I'm running it under my IP address. So this is a little bit of a rant I've got about this at this point in time. The thing is, I really love Python. I really enjoy using it, and I find it really does some cool stuff. But the one thing I do have an issue with is deploying it. You can run these things, you can run that on localhost, you see people demonstrating all these things, but it's the deploying that's a bit of a pain. And that's one of the things. I'd actually come from AutoHotkey script, which is just a simple scripting language. The nice thing with AutoHotkey script is that if I just come in to here and I just type Control-Alt-D, it just does it. It's running in the background. It's not a problem. I've got a few little scripts here, just 1, 2, 3, 4 somewhere along the line, maybe 5, are running in the background. They just run all the time. But they're not particularly powerful. They just do little things, but it works great. And that's the problem which I have with Python. Python can do some phenomenal stuff, and if you're just doing one-off things and running scripts and things like that, that's fine. But when you're trying to deploy it so that they're running all the time, I find that's when they become a bit of an issue. You know, suddenly I've got to get into, with AutoHotkey, you just had to run the scripts, and you just had to have AutoHotkey running on your PC, and they ran. And that's it. You didn't have to worry about deploying it; they just worked. Because Python's so much more powerful, you can actually do hotkeys and stuff like that within Python. But why would you? You know, because it's such a powerful thing. It takes a lot longer to load the scripts up and do those sorts of things. So, and this is the thing which I've had some of the issues with deployment. So it took me a long time, and this one here was quite a frustrating thing of getting the Flask app to actually run on a remote server. And when I got this up, I got it running on my IIS, so it's running on my Windows server. I finally got this Flask app up and running, and I could actually put it onto a web subdomain so that I can actually just come in here and type c.pyr2.tk and go bang, and it opens up now. And so I've actually got a specific subdomain that I can actually do, so I can actually do it for a domain, and I've got the program running through there. When's the next bus through? No current bus is running, so that doesn't work at this point in time. There's no buses. Oh, hey, wait a minute. Is it running the bus location there? Because no current bus is running, and when I did that resume, here's the bus, but it's going in the wrong direction. It's actually going down, so I would have missed it as such. So there's a current bus, but it's actually not in the right way. So total distraction, doesn't matter. So the thing, when I was doing this app through here, the issue which I actually had was getting it to work from outside. I could run it on my server as a local host, but trying to access it from outside when I was doing HTTP, it just wasn't working at all. So in the end, I'd actually make an HTTPS one, and I could make a sort of a web server such that it was actually running through there, and I had an IIS and it worked. Then I had the problem that I actually had two Flask apps, and because they actually had the same address, I got a conflict. Either one would run or the other one would run. So in the end, I actually combined them together into one Flask app so that I can do that. So if I come into here, and if I go c.pi r².tk, and then I go / I think B maybe, see if it's there. This then comes through, and it's another route that I can actually get to, so I can run the map, which is run purely on the / and then if I want the button to actually trigger, if I want the button to actually trigger the page, I've got to go on and do that. So it's still a little bit fiddly from that point of view, but I was able to run these through and run them through as HTTPS. I just want to first talk about the app that I've got here. So this is the chart one, which is a Streamlit. Now the first thing I want to talk about Streamlit is, if this was a Flask app, I would just have my cursor inside of here, run the script, and it would go through and run. But when you run a Streamlit app, it suddenly says nothing happens. It just says you've got to run Streamlit, run run the chart, run the file name. So I've actually got to paste that onto the command line, Control-Shift-V, sorry, and then if I go enter, it starts a server up, and then it gives you the HTTP that you can actually run it. Hooray, 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 hooray. So it's now running on localhost under that port there. So this seemed to be a real problem inside of the IIS. Now there was a few articles that I found inside the Streamlit community that talked about trying to run this on an IIS server, and in the end it sort of all went quiet because there don't seem to be anything working. The only solution that a lot of people said they don't bother with the IIS side of the server. All they do is they just have a task scheduler, and they just trigger, they just get a cursor, so they just get a command line, and then they just write on that command line, Streamlit run whatever, and so it's just run by a thing. But that means that you've got to run it with your IP address and then a port. Now again, you see here, this was a problem which I was actually having in the last video, is that if I was trying to do HTTP from outside of the server, it blocked me. But what I found you could do is that you could actually, in your firewall, to actually make an inbound rule that allowed that port to be open. Now I've opened this port specifically for this tutorial to this one to do, and this is the standard port. If you actually see the one that I've done on the local host, 8501 is a standard port for Streamlit. So what I'm going to have to do is that I'm going to have to find some weird port, something like blah 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 blah, and point it to that and make that an inbound rule that that one's open and only that one. So somebody will have to try through lots of numbers until they finally figure out which one it is. But then from a certain point of view, this is fine, because this app is purely for me for actually seeing what the prices are. Now I could set up and make it a bit more generalized, and if I did do that, then I'd actually have to find some other way of deploying this app. Now the ones that I've actually seen is that you can deploy to the community cloud a Streamlit app for free, and but it's going to be open, and if you actually want it closed or private, then you've got to pay some money towards that, and I think something like $5 a month or something, which to deploy that. But for the community one, you go onto your GitHub, you get a repository, and once you've got your repository, you then link your repository to the cloud, and then they link together. Now that doesn't appeal to me, because I got a VPS so that I could play with all of my things on that. I don't suddenly want to have an app over here, one over here, and have to maintain them in all these other obscure places. So to me, although to a certain extent it is in GitHub. So I've got my GitHub repository. I could actually just put it into the repository, and the fact that it's just been hosted up there is neither here or there. So if somebody else suddenly said, that's a really cool thing, I would like to know all of those electricity prices, I'd then suddenly saying, well, okay, then I'll make an open GitHub repository, I'll put the data into there, and you can actually make those API calls, and I'll set it up on Streamlit. Just personally, I just sort of suddenly thinking, personally, I'd rather go with this awkwardness, you know, and that's what I'll end up doing. I'll find a port that I'll be comfortable about using and do it, because it's only for me. So now coming back to that, so I've got a deployment such that I've got it onto a server and it's running, and I can access it from outside. Now I want to talk about some of the things about the Streamlit app. When I first did it the first time, I'm just going to close these down. When I did it the first time, I said, Mr. Bing Baby, write me a Streamlit app. And I said, this is the CSV data that I got. So I went into my thing and I said, that's what my CSV data looks like. So I'm going to bring that into pandas. Now write me a Streamlit app for it. And then you did this chart, and I said I want to display it as a chart. So I brought this chart in, and it has this line chart. So this is what I did the first time, and I said, oh, that's cool. Okay, then I want my x-axis label to be this. I want my y-axis label to be this. I want some vertical lines through there. And he said, whoop, can't do vertical lines for you. Shove off. And I'd like to button that. No, we don't do that. So I said, well, okay, then give me a library that will do that. So it then created this one down here. Now, normally when it does all of the charts, you can sort of see it in this format through here, or this one here is in white, so you can see this one through here. And then you get these little arrows. And if I hover this one here, but for the Altair one, it doesn't show it doesn't show the graph when it's minimized. So all you can do is sort of hover onto it until you get it. But the nice thing with this, when I was playing with this one, I said, well, okay, then now I've got that. And he said, I can't do vertical lines for you. He said, well, okay, then I'll live with that. Sorry, the second time I suddenly said, no, I wanted something with vertical lines. So it came through and it did MatPloLib. So that was just a static image. And I said, no, I wanted something dynamic so that I can hover over and get the information on a specific point, so I can get an idea of what the actual prices are through there, although it's a little bit of a pain to actually go through and do the hover. And then I said, and it did that for me, and so we got Altair, and I said, okay, now on a button, so that if I click on a button, I can just see that particular item that I want. And it did this, so I thought, oh, that's quite cool. And then if I do that, when it highlights that. Now, the particular thing that I quite like in the Altair is it grays the other ones out, so you've still got them as a reference that you can see how they relate to each other. You can just go select all categories and it'll show them all. The weird thing with this is 11 o'clock at night, so that should be 2300, and this is at 7 o'clock in the morning, but it's actually saying, so it seems to have skewed, although my date time is correct, in other words I've got a date time and the time label in the 24-hour period, it's actually got them skewed around the wrong way. So I thought, well, okay then, I'm aware of that. I tried resorting the data, but it shows the data in the right way, you know, from 11 o'clock yesterday through to something in the future over here. So I said, okay then, because I can use any library, do me another one in Plotly. Now I only did the first part in the plot, and I said, well, also I'd want buttons through here. So it made buttons so that I could actually just see one part of the graph. And this has got a really fun thing in here, and I'll talk about it a bit later because it's more of a run. And after doing the Plotly one, I suddenly thought, well, okay, then as I come around, I want to be able to hover as I come along with the line. I want some vertical lines, so I suddenly thought I'd try a third one. So this is with Bokeh, Bokeh, I think, yeah. And as I want some vertical grids, which it gave me, and also Plotly gave me vertical grids, which I was quite pleased with. But as I came along, I said I wanted to have tooltips so that it would give me the information of what everything was at a specific point in time. So that's what it does. It gives me the labels through there. So I got to the point where I was doing the labels, and I thought, well, I'm quite pleased with the Plotly one. And then I saw this thing in Plotly that you could do this. You could pull these brackets in through to here, and get it a certain one. There were buttons which this one says all and it resets them all. But I was kind of quite loving what this one was doing through here, so I sort of got quite fond with the Plotly that it would do this, and it would do the hovers, so it would give the indicators of all the things, and at the bottom it would give the dates as well. And again, these can expand, both that one and the other one can expand, so that as you hover along, you see the date and the time at the bottom, and then you see all the different values for all the different lines. The other thing which I think is really cool about this one thing which is a negative, if I just go WS, it just hides the other two straight away. Then if I go all, they all come back again. But if I've got, because of the WS, this thing here is causing this scale, and this is something which I find a bit of a pain on here, is that I just want to see what the line is down here. And suddenly something's overwhelmed it. It's just gone through the madness, through the roof or something, and it's just out of control. So you don't get a very good idea of the scale with it. But what I actually found inside here is that look what happens when I do the RTD. Now the RTD is this little pink one down the bottom here. Now as soon as I click on that, it does subplots. So therefore this is a plot purely for this. So it changes the scale, because the scale is only based on this one line. If I click on this one, you see it goes up to 140 because that's only based on this particular line. So I find this absolutely brilliant, is that it then gives me the granularity of the scale that I want to actually see where things are. So that was really good. Now, when I started to reflect about this, I suddenly thought, right, I'm sort of happy with the Plotly. I might try a couple of others, but so far, you know, we've tried MatPloLib, we've tried the standard one from, the basic one from Streamlit, we've tried Altair, and we've tried Bokeh, and we've come to this one sort of meets my needs as far as what I want. So I'm pleased about that. So when I went back into here, I suddenly think, well, what else do I want? And to a certain extent, I want to have a sort of a data that I can actually say of a data range. Can you tell me when the price is going to be between a certain thing? Now, to a certain extent, there's an indicator of here of when things are happening. But what I could do is I could actually download the data into CSV. So I've got to manually download that. Then I'd have to process that with some sort of script. So I suddenly thought, well, I've got all of that data. So what I ended up doing is that they do this thing called a table. So I can end up with a value. Tell me when the prices are going to be less than $50. And it gives me a table. And it goes through each half hour. So it's basically doing a lookup on that table. Now I'm just going to jump into the code here because there's a couple of things that are quite neat. So on this one here, I've just got my options, so I've got the scale that I actually want to do on this, and some I think the 100 and 200 are way much too much. I'm actually only interested in this low end one through here, and it does a select box through there, and it chooses the option. So whatever option you chose, and then it just does an expander, and the expander hides the table, or it can open up the table, and then it filters the data. So we get the filtered data, which just says, show me the PRSL column of the selected value, anything equal to or below that, and then also as long as the RTD is null. So that means it's not going to show any of these ones here. So it's not going to show me anything historic, it's only going to show me things in the future. So that means I'm trying to make a decision on what's happening in the future through here. So if we just go back to that script and we come into here, sorry, I just want to, and we come into this particular script through here, I can now filter this down, and I can suddenly say, well, okay then, when's the price going to be less than $2.50 for megawatt? So if I just collapse that and bring it back up again, I've still got a whole load of values, so you're starting to think, oh, most of the time. But then I can actually come down and say, okay, then when's it going to be less than $1? So there's a window, actually it's closed off now. Now that's gone from 10 o'clock through the one. But in fact, part of that, if we just come through, and I'll bring it through to that point there, and I'll just go into the filter and do the RTD. There's a time here, which was just the hour gone. I've just been doing this video a couple of times, when in the last hour between 2:30 and 3:30, when it was less than $1. So this is actually from 10 o'clock onwards and pretty much through to the next day. Most of it is actually this middle column here. Most of it's actually under $1, so that's great. So, but what it was there was actually a period between 2:30 and 3:30 when it was under $1. So I thought, oh, I'll just go and turn my hot water cylinder on, because that being a third of my electricity usage, which was mainly hot water heating. So I'm thinking, well, I can do it when it's really cheap. So this quickly allows me to filter the times when I can do it. I'm suddenly saying, well, okay, then if I'm up at 10 o'clock, I'll put it on, and then I've just got to remember to turn it off before, whatever period it is that I need to do. So this is a really handy thing to do, and it's very, very easy to set up. Now, when I was testing this and doing all of these plots and stuff like that, if we just go back to the original script, this is another thing which I find quite nice in this one through here. I've got two scripts. I've got the one which displays the chart with the Streamlit app. The first one actually goes through, makes the API call, I think goes and gets the bearer so that it's got the bearer token so it can make the API calls. So it makes the API call, then makes the 3 API calls to do with each of the 3 lines on the chart, processes all of that stuff, creates temporary files all the way through, then creates the final CSV file that looks like this, and right at the very end, any of the temporary files which begin with underscore, it goes and deletes them. So it cleans up my files so that I don't end up with a lot more junky files than what I actually need. So that's one part of the process, but what I can actually do in the second one, the charts one, is that I've got the title and a bit of a blurb saying what's actually happening through there. But I've got a delete button on it. Now, if we just go through and we just collapse that one through there, we've got delete graph plot file to refresh the data. So what this process is doing at this point in time is it looks, when it comes through, he says, does this file exist for today? So there's a file with the 0-wit API, blah, 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 CSV. So if it's got today's date one on it, then it says, yeah, it's there, so we just ignore it. But, sorry, where are we? Yeah, so it just, if it's not there, then run that sub-process, so regenerate it. If it is there, don't bother doing anything. So let's just look and see what happens with that part of the process. So, like, if you've got a weekend, or if you've just done a check and you're doing a check an hour later, and especially you'll find that there seems to be, if we just come and go all onto that, you'll find there's a lot of activity, maybe 7, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, and there's usually some activity around 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the evening. And usually in the middle of the day and through the night time tends to be reasonably static. There doesn't seem to be a lot of change through those particular areas. So if you know there's going to be a lot of change through there, then you can actually see that. That's when the pink line sort of doesn't match. So if we go into something, where can we go for that one? Maybe if we go into the Altair one for an example, you see there's a difference between the two blue lines at this point in time. But generally the rest of the time, they're pretty much matching themselves all the way through. They seem to be tracking. And there's only a couple of times when they sort of get out of variance. So generally you can take what's coming forward to be reasonably static. And also, like on the weekends, after they've done the share trading all the day, do the week, your PRSL line isn't going to change anymore because there's no more trading. So that's sort of stuck on what it's going to be for the whole weekend. So you don't need to update the data all the time. And if I just do a refresh on here, and you'll see this is doing a connection, it's just gone through, it's running, it's done. Now, if I delete this, going and deleting it, Now it's got to make all of the API calls. It's got to bring them in. It's going to have to convert them from JSON into JSON into data frames and all of that, and make all of these things and do all of that process. Then regenerate all the time. You can see it takes a bit longer. So, and it's still leaving that. I've got to figure out how to clean that one off. It does that. So overall, you know, you can actually just have it really fast or not fast at all. So generally, I think I've got what I want from here. Straight away, I can access this. I don't have to log in each time. I don't have to do all of these other things. I don't have to switch between the dashboard and the other ones, and I don't really use much on the dashboard or anything like that. I can actually just go to this app anytime I want and actually just make the calls, and boom, it comes through. And I can actually say, okay, then I need to make a decision when I'm going to turn the hot water cylinder on at some point in the day, most probably around midday, because usually in the afternoon it goes a bit slow, and then at night time. So do I get up in the night, or can I just do it in the afternoon if I'm around? So especially on the weekends and stuff like that. So this tool works perfectly for me now. I can actually just use the Plotly. Now, one of the issues that I did have, and I'm going to come onto my local host, so I'm going to run this, and it's now running on my local host, so I'm just going to see if I can trigger that one off, or I might actually have to start it again. So it's running on my local host through here, sorry, and we just get that up and running. So that's running on the local host there, and now I need Control-Alt-C through here. Now, I just want to see if how I've got this set up. Okay, this is not what I wanted. So I want to do this, and I think I just need to go down to the end, and there we are again, and I just do that and do a hash. And this is an issue which I had when I was doing it, and I just refreshed that one there. When I came to try and run this on the mobile device, so I changed it to a mobile. Now if I just go into network, so it's not going to go all active, when I got to the chart's disappearing off the side of the screen. And then when you try and drag things, it starts doing this loopy stuff, and weird things happen. So it gets very, very frustrating because it's not containing within the frame of the mobile phone. So trying to press the button to make it expand or contract or things like that. And the same also happened with this one down here. So trying to find this arrow such that I could even get in to actually do this one here is a bit of a nuisance as well. And the other thing was, I found with the mobile phone, when I tried sticking my fingers on these were really hard. I kept on triggering the wrong ones. So if I was going to stay with the Altair one, I'd end up having to do something to actually get these spaced out a lot further, so that you can actually, you are able to touch them with your fingers. They were just too small to actually touch. And even as this expanded, it's not working very well for the Altair one. But so there's this issue of it going off the side of the screen. In the end, after doing a little bit of a lookup with that, and I was suddenly thinking, well, you know, the whole idea of having this dynamic was so that I could use it remotely. I don't have to be on my PC at home. I could be anywhere. I'm just doing a web call. So inside of the code, what you can do is, instead of, this is the normal way, you just say Bokeh chart P or whatever, or B or whatever you're calling the thing. But if you actually use container width true, it will keep, we will do that on both of this one, that on the Plotly chart as well, where we've used the fig for that, and we'll do a save. And now if we just go back and refresh that app now, you'll see that if we just come down into that, you'll see the plot goes the whole width. So if I wanted to find the button, double click to back out or whatever, I think if there's a button in there somewhere, but I can actually come in, with my finger, I can actually go and do these adjustments and see. This is another slight negative that I've got, is that at this point in time, this is too scrunched up as a table. Now I only need the date time, and I only need the PRSL, so I can actually maybe rewrite my script so that I only get that. And I actually don't need any of the, all I need is the day, and then I just need the hour and the minute, so I don't need the seconds into there. So I could tidy that up a bit to actually make that a bit more tidy to use. So that's one thing. The other one is these charts are fully within that area, and if you find I think I can physically find the button for expanding it all the way through. But at the end of the day, Plotly, even at this level, does what I want from the point of view of the RDS and the things, and that I can actually just bring the end columns in from the side to bound to where I actually want to show the bits of the chart that I want. So that's more than adequate for what my needs. So at this point, this meets my needs more than this does, because although I can come into here and suddenly saying, oh well, this is the best time, I find actually just having the table that just gives you the times of when those things are very easy to use. I've just got to kind of get the granularity right for these ones here. What are those? I tried 0.25, 0.5, 0.7. I thought that's a bit unnecessary, you know. The other thing is as well, this is in dollars per megawatt hour, and in fact my bill is in dollars per kilowatt hour, so I need to divide the numbers by 1,000 to actually see how many cents it is, so that although you can see when it's cheap and when it's not cheap, so maybe that unit is more than adequate. So putting that use container width allows it to actually be, it works on a mobile device, because that's one of the issues. You know, you can get something working, but then is it going to work on the devices that you need it to work on? The same with the other ones. So overall, it's been a challenge. I've still got that little bit of frustration with deploying Python apps. I love it for what it can really do. I found the automations, some of the automations where it's actually sending you the email at certain points is good, but in other ways, you know, on an automated, on a time schedule. But I think there's certain things that you actually want the information at a specific time, because things change. So I might even think about going through and revisiting something like my ephemeris for actually giving me a more focused, you know, I'm sort of doing a daily ephemeris, but if you're actually just going out and looking at the stars, you're really not going to be out there for too long. So maybe you only want the data for an hour's worth. So doing that means that the data's a lot more compact, and you know, the information's a lot more easy to read, whereas the one that I actually have at the moment, the table, is so you've got to do a lot of zooming in just to see the data, which is a little bit fiddly. So and the other thing is with the Streamlit is they use it for full websites, that I think is quite nice as well. So it's more versatile. The issue I do have is, although to a certain extent, by actually going through this method, the fact that you've actually got to put the IP address in and then the port that you want, means that because you're not working on that subdomain, the IIS one, whereas I ended up with the conflict with the two Flask apps trying to be called because they were, even though I shifted the port numbers, I can't remember what they were, 5000 and 5002, 5001 and 5002 or something like that, they still, whichever one was triggered first, the other Flask app still came through on the thing. That was really messy. With this method, you can actually run those things, so you can run 3 or 4 different Streamlit apps at the same time, and they're not going to conflict at all because you're calling the ports directly. So again, I can actually do that. It's just, you know, setting it up so that you're not typing this out each time, but then again, you just make that a favorite app or something, and then you've got that URL to go to each time. So in some ways, this is a partial solution. It isn't quite the most elegant, and maybe I might consider hosting it on the community cloud, just from the point of view of the process for what this is doing. This electricity spot price one would be useful for a lot of people who are all on that particular one, so it might be worth just doing it as a community app type thing that people can have that access, because I do find this modifies my behaviour knowing what the price of the electricity is, and it has made me savings, although they're trivial really, but the point is it's reflecting the fact that if you've got access to the information, you're making a lot more decisions based on knowledge rather than an estimate or a guesswork, because sometimes in the middle of the night it can go wacky sometimes. Anyway, I hope you found that of interest. Thank you very much for watching. If you found it useful, please give a thumbs up. If not, Panyaha.